You know, for centuries, one name has pretty much been a synonym for terror, for conquest, and for the brutal end of an era: Attila the Hun. To the Romans, he was something else entirely. They called him Flagellum Dei, the Scourge of God. He was like a force of nature sent to punish a sinful world. So today, we're going to tear down the myths to find the man who brought the mighty Roman Empire to its knees.
I mean, listen to this quote from the historian Jordanes. This isn't just history. It's a record of pure psychological terror. Notice how he talks about dreadful rumors. See, for Attila, fear was a weapon, every bit as powerful as a Hunnic archer. It was a legacy of dread that echoed long after he was gone.
So that really brings us to our big question, right? Was Attila just this savage barbarian king that Roman propaganda made him out to be? Or was there a more complex, a more strategic, and maybe even a disciplined mind behind all that chaos? We're going to peel back the layers of legend to find the real historical figure at the center of the storm.
All right, so first up, let's try to separate the man from the monster. Because, as Roman writers knew very well, it's really easy to paint your enemies as inhuman. But the reality is always so much more fascinating.
Okay, so on the left, you've got the Roman boogeyman, the savage, uncivilized brute from the steppes. But the reality? Well, the man on the right, the one described by people who actually met him, he was something else entirely. He wasn't some savage. He was a privileged noble, born right into the Hunnic royal family. He was a master diplomat, using treaties to extort absolute fortunes. And, maybe most surprising of all, he was known for his personal modesty.
So here's the only physical description we have of the guy, and it comes from a Roman diplomat named Priscus. He describes a man who was short, broad-chested, had a big head, small eyes, a flat nose. I mean, it's not exactly the portrait of a monster, is it? It's the portrait of a man from the Eurasian steppes. Even in his enemy's description, what comes through isn't monstrosity, but this profound sense of otherness.
And get this, at a huge banquet, Priscus saw that while Attila's lieutenants and all his guests were served on these fancy silver and gold platters, Attila himself ate only meat from a plain old wooden plate. He commanded this immense wealth, but seemed to have zero personal desire for luxury. This wasn't about greed. For Attila, it was about power. It was all a strategy, projecting this image of an incorruptible leader who was focused only on one thing: conquest.
So how did this modest but incredibly ambitious man forge one of history's most feared empires? Well, the answer is pretty simple: through absolute, uncompromising ruthlessness.
This timeline here shows his calculated climb to the top. In 434, he and his brother Bleda inherit rule together. They spend years expanding their power side by side, this dual force just terrorizing the Romans. But look at that crucial point, 445. Bleda is suddenly dead. And just like that, Attila stands alone, the undisputed ruler of the Huns. For a man like him, sharing power was never, ever a long-term option. And you know, the historical accounts are blunt. They don't hint at an accident or some kind of illness. Nope. They state Bleda was slain by Attila's treachery. His first major move on the world stage was to murder his own brother. It was a brutal act that sent a crystal-clear message to every single friend and foe. Absolutely nothing would stand in the way of his ambition.
But brute force wasn't enough. And Attila, he knew it. He was a master propagandist. He spun this incredible legend about an ancient sword found in a field, the divine sword of Mars, the god of war himself. By claiming this sword, Attila wasn't just a king, he was divinely chosen, an instrument of cosmic will. It was a brilliant piece of political theater that made his warriors believe he was literally invincible.
So, with his power now absolute, and his legend totally secure, Attila turned his unified war machine on his true target, the crumbling, but still fantastically wealthy Roman Empire.
So what does that kind of power look like in real terms? Well, it looks like this: 2,100 pounds of solid gold. That was the annual tribute Attila forced the Eastern Roman Empire to pay him every year. It was a crippling amount that basically made the Huns the new shareholders of the Roman economy, funding their own war machine with Roman gold.
And here's the thing, the Huns weren't just horsemen from the steppes anymore. Under Attila, they adapted. They became masters of siege warfare, learning from their enemies and turning Roman tech, like battering rams and siege towers, against Roman walls. His campaigns weren't just raids, they were a systematic deconstruction of the empire.
The trail of devastation was just immense. Cities that had stood for centuries were literally wiped off the map. Singidunum, Serdica, and, most symbolic of all, Nisus, the birthplace of Constantine the Great, the emperor who founded the Eastern Roman Empire. By razing it to the ground, Attila was sending a message: your great empire's past is now my rubble. All told, over 70 cities were sacked in a single campaign.
This is such a crucial point. It wasn't random violence. It was calculated psychological warfare. Roman sources describe mass crucifixions along the roadsides, designed to horrify anyone who might even think about resisting. Captives were impaled. In one campaign against the Burgundians, he didn't just beat them, he nearly annihilated them. This barbarity was a weapon, forged to break the will of his enemies before a single arrow was even fired.
For almost 20 years, Attila's empire seemed unstoppable, just this invincible force of destruction. And then, just as quickly as it rose, it vanished.
The turning point came in 451. For the first time ever, a coalition of old enemies, Romans and Visigoths, actually stood together against the common threat. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains was one of the bloodiest in ancient history, and it stopped Attila's advance into Gaul. For the first time, he was halted. He was so sure he was going to be defeated that he had this massive pyre of horse saddles built, ready to throw himself into the flames rather than be captured.
But the Scourge of God wasn't cut down on the battlefield. No, his end was almost comically anticlimactic. In 453, after a night of heavy feasting for his latest wedding, Attila had a massive nosebleed, or maybe burst a blood vessel. He choked to death in his sleep. Can you believe that? The world's most feared warrior died not by the sword, but by a hemorrhage.
His funeral, though, was as epic as his life. He was put in 3 coffins, each with a purpose: iron to symbolize his conquests, silver for the tribute he won, and pure gold for the immense wealth of his empire. He was buried in a secret diverted riverbed, and in a final ruthless act to protect his legacy, every single person who helped bury him was executed, making sure his final resting place would never, ever be found.
And this just brilliantly illustrates his empire's greatest weakness. You see, the Hunnic Empire was Attila. The moment he died, his sons immediately fell into a civil war, fighting over the inheritance. The tribes he had conquered rose up in rebellion. And get this, within just 16 years, the mighty empire he had built completely disintegrated. It just vanished from history.
So his empire vanished, like a ghost on the plains. So what is Attila's real legacy? Well, even though his kingdom was fleeting, the shadow he cast over Europe, that is permanent.
Okay, his legacy is really a paradox. 1, he was a master unifier, forging scattered tribes into one terrifying empire. 2, he was a brutal conqueror who absolutely perfected the art of psychological warfare. 3, he was a cunning diplomat who understood that the threat of war could be more profitable than war itself. 4, his was an empire of one. It was a personal project that just could not survive without him. And finally, and this is the most crucial part, he was an accidental world changer. The terror of his invasions pushed tribes like the Goths and Vandals deep into Roman territory, speeding up its final collapse and redrawing the map of Europe forever.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Was Attila simply a destructive monster whose only legacy was ruin and death? Or was he, completely unintentionally, the hammer that shattered the old Roman world? The Scourge of God may have only intended to burn the old world down, but in doing so he accidentally forged a brand new one from its ashes.